solving quadratic word problems by using the quadratic formula. Okay, here we have a word problem that is exercise number 10 from activity number 12. A newspaper delivery person in a car is tossing folded newspapers from the car window to driveways. The speed of the car is 30 feet per second and the driver does not slow down. The newspapers are tossed horizontally from a height of 4 feet above the ground. The height of the newspapers are, as they are thrown, can be modeled by y equals negative 16t squared plus 4, and the distance they travel to the driveway is d equals 30t. The first question says, how long does it take for a newspaper to land? So for this one, we need to use this equation, right? And from there, we can find out the time, right? For the second, from how many feet before the driveway must the newspaper be thrown? So here it says that we need to find out distance in this case, right? And we need to use that equation. For C, the delivery person starts to throw the newspapers at an angle, and the height of the papers as they travel can be modeled by y equals 16t squared plus 12t plus 4. So for the third one, we have a new equation, right? This one. And it's asking of how long does it take the papers to reach the ground. So here again is asking about time. Okay, so now that we know what we have to do here with this word problem, we can move on to the first part, that it says, how long does it take for a newspaper to land? So for that, I need to use the first equation that says y equals negative 16 t squared, right, plus 4. That's the equation that I have to use for the first one. And this, since this equation is without the middle term, right, for a standard form, I can use any method to solve this one. So I have to take a look at how is my equation, and first always to try to solve a quadratic equation, we always have to equal to 0, right? This would be negative 16t squared plus 4 equals 0. So for this one, it's better to use the taking square roots method. Then I will have negative 16t squared equals negative 4. So then I can multiply both sides times negative 1, right, to change the sign. This would be 16t squared equals 4. Now I can move the 16 to the other side to divide. This would be t squared equals 4 over 16. In this case, I have to use square roots, right? I have to take the square root. So this would be equal to what? If I take the square root of 4 over 16, that would be, the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 16 would be 4. Then I can simplify to 1/2. That means that I will have two different times at the end, right? Since I'm taking the square root, I will have a positive and a negative. So I will have time 1 would be 1/2, and time 2 would be negative 1/2. But since I'm talking about a real life word problem, I'm going to use the positive time. So that means that in 0.5 seconds, the newspaper will land, right? For the first part. This would be the answer for the first part. Let's move on to the next. So from how many feet before the driveway must the newspaper be thrown? For that one, I have another equation that is the equation for distance, right? And the distance says that is 30t. 30 times t. Now that I know that the time from the other question is equal to 1/2 or, right, or 0.5, I can multiply 30 times 1/2 or 0.5. So the distance will be 30 times 1/2, let's say, right? And here, when I multiply a whole number times a fraction, I can always write a 1 down there, down the whole number, and it will be 30 halves. And 30 divided by 2 is what? Is 15. So the distance at the end from how many feet before the driveway must the papers be thrown would be 15 feet. So that's the final answer for the second one. And let's move on to the third and the last part, right? The third and the last part says the delivery person starts to throw the newspapers at an angle, and the height of the papers as they travel can now be modeled by y equals -16t squared plus 12t and plus 4. So I need to find out the time again here, right? So how can I find out the time? Since this equation is in the standard form, what is the standard form? Is ax squared plus bx plus c, right? We know that this is the standard form of a quadratic. And this expression is very similar to this one, right? So I can plug in all those terms in my quadratic formula and I will get the answer. So I can say that the time would be equal to what? It's going to be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. This is my quadratic formula, right? Now I can plug in the terms that I have, and this would be negative, let's say with the numbers, this would be negative 12, right? Because b is 12 according to my equation, plus or minus the square root of 12 squared, right? Minus 4 times what? A is negative 16, right? And times c, that is 4 according to my exercise. And all of it is over 2 times negative 16, because negative 16 is a. Now I can introduce this expression on my calculator. That would be negative 12 plus or minus the square root of 12 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 4 over 2 times negative 16. And the answer would be what? It's going to be one answer is negative 1 over 4, and the other answer that I get using the formula will be 1. So since I'm using a real world problem, right, and I'm talking about time, we always will find out times positive, right? So the final answer here for time should be that the time, it would be now 1 second, right? That is the final answer here, because this is the correct one.